Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and today we're going to be jumping into a series of videos where I predict what I expect the Jaguars to do in each part of the 2024 NFL offseason. So there's going to be a lot more videos on these topics. I'm going to start off today talking about roster cuts, so this will be talking about players currently under contract that I think could end up getting cut. I will also mention the ones I do not think will. And then after this, we're going to go into the extensions. We're going to go into some potential trades, hopefully both trades where maybe a player leaves Jacksonville, and then also trades where maybe a player comes into Jacksonville. You know, players I just think have a good shot of changing scenery in regards to Jacksonville. And then after that, we're going to go into free agency predictions, talk about some players that could come here. And then we're in draft season. So we got a lot of exciting stuff to talk about then. On that topic, my big board is finally completed after the Senior Bowl. It's a lot of work, but I had time to work on it this week. I have 141 prospects on there. You guys can check it out. It's free, no charge to you at all. It's available for fans, and of course, it's all my opinions. But 141 prospects, got a lot of information on them. Gonna do a little more data entry, so hopefully things like arm length, maybe wingspan, hand size, random things that I think would be useful, and try to code that in. And then I might add a few names as well that I feel like should have made it on there. But these are all draftable prospects for you guys, so people I think that you could consider during the NFL draft. So that's what I've been working on. I'm really excited to share that all with you, and I'm hoping to go into some videos where we do position rankings for the draft as well. So that's what I've got for you guys, just as a preview of what's coming up on the channel. But we are here to talk about the roster cuts, and so we are going to jump right into this. I have 9 players that I'm going to talk about today. There's 5 of them I think will be retained, most of those players at the beginning, so stick with me through those. But I think there's quite a few players that are also going to be cut, and a lot of them being big cap hits for this team if they were to stay. So let's get started. Our first guy I want to talk about, a small name here. He's a backup, but it's CJ Beathard, our backup quarterback behind Trevor Lawrence. And I would differ personally from retaining him. If it was me, I would be looking to move on. I would be looking for a better backup because I think you can do a little more there. And with Lawrence having a down year, I'm not really bringing in someone who's going to I think is going to steal the starting job or anything crazy like that. But I am going to bring in someone that is able to start if needed because we've seen a lot of injuries take place. We clearly need to be preparing in case that happens again next year. And you do want to add that little bit of fire to that quarterback room, add a little bit of competition. And you got to do that everywhere on this roster. Even that position, although obviously I'm not expecting Lawrence to somehow get beat out by a $1.5 million quarterback we bring in or whatever it is. But Beathard, I think the Jaguars are going to keep because they value him as a teacher for Lawrence. They've said that very clearly. Lawrence is obviously good friends with him, has a lot of good things to say about him. You could tell that he likes having him on the team. And while I don't think he did good enough, he did win in his only start for the Jaguars. And you look at some of the other games too. I take Cincinnati, for example, which is in the picture. He threw a pass down to within the 5-yard line, I think, in overtime to Calvin Ridley. They were probably going to go win that game, and they got called for a holding penalty. And I don't think the holding penalty was fair, honestly. I think it was pretty cheap, but at the same time, it is what it is. And I think you can see if you're Jacksonville, okay, he can do good enough. We can have this as our backup. And it's not a ton of money. We don't have to make a decision and then potentially risk having a really bad backup. So I think that's how they look at it. Whereas for me, I would personally just be looking around for a player I think is an upgrade. And once you acquire that player, then I would cut Beathard. But, we'll have to see what happens, of course. But I think Beathard's going to stay in Jacksonville. That's a pretty clear one to me. But it's not as clear as the next one for me, which I have to throw out because the cap numbers are large. Christian Kirk. It's really obvious he's going to stay in Jacksonville. I won't spend much time talking about this, but Kirk this last season, obviously he had less yards, but he played quite a few less games. And when I was doing the math on this before this video, if you take out the 126-yard catch from his 12th game of the year, which was his first target of the game, and he got hurt on that play. You take the average yards per game of the first 11 games. He was on pace for nearly 1,200 yards this year. He would have hit 1,176. So he was going to have a career year in 2023 after having a career year in 2022. He's a player that keeps getting better. And while he's not the game-breaking receiver, like a Tyreek Hill or, A.J. Brown, Stephon Diggs, Justin Jefferson, any names you want to throw out there, there's quite a few. Christian Kirk is as good as it gets when you're not talking about those elite wide receiver ones. He's a very valuable player. He's a huge friend of the guys on the team, huge leader on the team. Obviously, you could tell they missed him a lot, but he's just a reliable player who's going to convert first downs, who's going to keep the offense moving, and every team needs one of those players. So I don't think there's really even a route to where Christian Kirk doesn't finish out these next 2 years at bare minimum. Even if he had a bad 2024, there's so much on film of him succeeding with this team that I think they would pay him the final year. So don't worry about him. He's not going anywhere. And it doesn't really offer you much cap space this year anyway. I think some of the money might still be guaranteed at this point. So it's not really a logical move for the Jaguars. And, you think about how much you're losing. It would be really dumb if they did that. And so I don't think it's really even an option. But I will put him out there just because of the cap hit. Now the next one, Zay Jones. Similar to Beathard, I would be moving on. And I would be way more convinced with Zay Jones because I look at how he played this year, and I just don't think he earned a spot because the injuries were clearly a factor, of course, but there was a downturn in performance. I look at the game against Kansas City in week 2 where he had multiple opportunities to bring down touchdown passes where this team would have been in the game. They could have possibly beat KC. And just for some context for you guys, now I don't think they would have beat them in the playoffs the way they played. If they won that game, they would have been a higher seed than Kansas City. I mean, we were 2 games behind Kansas City at the end of the year, and that game was the factor at the end of it all. So there would be a different story for this team if players like him had stepped up in that game, but he just did not play well. He could not bring down catches. The things that he did so well in 2022, he didn't in 2023. And then you had the off-the-field issues. I don't think they're huge, but there's just too many things adding up for me. However, I don't think Jacksonville views it that way. And that's why I have him getting retained after giving you all these reasons why I'd move on from him. I do think he will be there because this is a guy that, I think they can see a path to him to produce for this team. He clearly had some games in 2022 where he was very productive for the Jaguars. He even had a few moments this year. This is a guy that I think they could see as like an 800, 900 yard receiver. And if you're paying $8 million for that, that's a good deal. That's fine. But for me, I just don't know if he lives up to that. And I think you're paying him a lot of money and expecting to get the absolute ceiling out of him to justify that. And I don't think that's good. But this is one I think the team's going to look at it very differently than what the fans do. And he'll probably be back because, I think they'll like what he offers and what he's done before and think they're going to get that version. And they're probably going to bet on that for a lot of this team, blaming injuries for a lot of things. But we're going to get into an actual cut now that we've talked about 3 guys getting retained. A lot more of these are going to be cuts at this point. And we're just kind of moving basically from quarterback, receiver, offensive line, and then through the defensive line, linebackers, and then the secondary. So we're going to jump into Cam Robinson now. Cam Robinson, I think, is going to get released. I'm pretty confident in that. And I will go ahead and put an asterisk on this because what I mean by this is not necessarily that he cannot be a Jaguar in 2024. What I mean is I think the path to him becoming a Jaguar or even going to another team, which are the only 2 options, has to go through him getting released. Because for Jacksonville, I think the money Cam is going to want if you renegotiate is going to be too high. I think the best course of action for this team is to release him to the market, tell him, you let us know what you're offered, if you still want to play here, and we'll consider matching it. Because he does want to stay in Jacksonville. But you have to make it clear that this 17 to 18 million dollar, average per year he's getting is not realistic right now. And it's not just about the fact that he hasn't been available either, but the way he's played, I mean, he's good, but he's not that level. I don't think he's an incredible run blocker. I think that's something a team clearly needs. He's still, I think, in the last couple of years, given up a decent amount of sacks at the position. I'll actually look this up on the fly as we're talking about this. So in 2023, he gave up 3 sacks, and that's in starting half the year, which was all he was available. For the year before, 2021 was his good year. That's why he earned a contract. He gave up only 1 sack over the year, but just his play, I don't think it's been good enough. He's been just the same guy. You wanted him to take a step on this contract. That's what you're projecting because you're paying him to be a better player. It just hasn't lived up to it, and he's not available. So I think this is a guy that they say, we're going to let you go. Let us know what people offer you. We'll consider bringing you back, but, some things are going to change. And on that topic, if Cam Robinson did return to this team, I don't think he would be the left tackle. And he will probably end up taking a job somewhere else because their team is going to offer him being a left tackle. I mean, look at the New York Jets. Would they take Cam Robinson as their left tackle? Absolutely. They need help. They need offensive tackles. It would be nice for them to not necessarily be handicapped into picking that during the NFL draft and having more options because they're in a really good spot where they should just take the best player available, which could be a tackle, but you go get Cam Robinson, you have more options. So I think for Jacksonville, it's pretty clear that he would probably move over to the right side if he comes back after being released, because when Balky talked about Anton and his future, because obviously Balky wanted to talk about Anton a lot, it was his one good move of the offseason. He's got to focus on that because he wants to keep his job. So he was talking about it, and he's saying, when he's asked, do you think he could play left tackle? He said he thought he could. And usually, these guys in the front office, when you're talking to them, they know why you're asking questions. And if they really wanted to keep Cam Robinson, I think they would have done more to defend him and saying, well, we got Cam Robinson as our left tackle, so that's not really a question that's relevant. We're saying something like that to prove, yeah, we're not done with Cam. We're not thinking about Anton as the left tackle right now. But they clearly are. They clearly think he could play there. And so I think this is just the route it's going to go. I think his number has to change. He might come back as a right tackle, and Anton kind of takes over on the left side because that's where he should be long term. But I think at the end of the day, he gets released, and I do think he ends up going to a different team that pays him just as much as us, but wants him to play at left tackle, which is worth more money. So those are my thoughts on Cam Robinson. Probably one of the more interesting guys to talk about here. There is one more that's kind of similar we'll talk about later in this video. It's very intriguing. But the other guy on the offensive line to talk about is Brandon Scherff, which would be another release candidate for me because, well, I think Jacksonville likes Brandon Scherff. You got to keep in mind quite a few factors here. One is that he's either 33 or he's turning 33 this year. So this is a guy who's clearly going to be on the decline. You don't get better when you're 33 years old playing offensive line. It just doesn't happen. So you're not going to get better performance out of him. And you look at the way he's played, he's not terrible. There's surely some lapses and some plays where I just hate what I see. But he's pretty much been an average guy with some good intelligence to be able to know what's going on and to block well. But then you got to factor in, where is this guy on the pay scale? When we look at these numbers, you take right guards only. Every right guard in the league. He's the 3rd highest paid right guard in all the league at $16.5 million. The highest paid player at guard in all of the league was Chris Lindstrom, who I think signed his extension last offseason for $20.5 million. This is $4 million off best player in the league, okay? And then you look at all the offensive guards, and he's 5th. Still, top 5. Average play does not earn you that money, especially when you know that the average play is now the ceiling of what you're going to get because he's not going to improve as he gets older. It's very, very unlikely. And even if Jacksonville looked at like, hey, we're moving on from Cam, we need like a leadership presence on this team, right? And that would be Scherff. I think what does him in really it is the way Fortner played next to him was so bad this year that it just makes him look even worse. And I mean Brandon Scherff. Because when you have a center that's getting like pile driven or pile drive, whatever the word is, when he's just getting shoved into the quarterback like instantly every play, like cannot hold the block, you're not going to look good because you're not just worrying about your own responsibility, but you're worrying about the center. It's the same thing for like Ezra Cleveland, who we'll talk about in probably the next video for this series. But both players didn't look as good because they're making up for the mistakes of the worst center in the league. So Brandon Scherff, if he had any shot, I think it's kind of dead because of what the situation was around him. You know, even if he did have a really good right tackle next to him in Anton Harrison. And I got to think about this too. Balky emphasized very clearly as press conference. He chooses messages he wants to put along, and you can read into it and you can figure out really what they're thinking. The thing that he said multiple times was that this team had to get more physical in the trenches. How do you do that? You get new starters. You don't just magically all of a sudden have guys who are getting destroyed be just great players, especially when you're 33 years old. Not that he was getting destroyed all the time, but he's obviously on the decline. So to make changes, you have to have new people on the field. It doesn't matter if you bring in a new backup. So how do you do that? You get rid of guys who have a big cap hit that aren't playing well for you. So Brandon Scherff, I think it'll be a hard decision for them, but I think they are going to make that decision. I don't think they renegotiate with him because I think at this point some other team is just going to offer him more because of the name and because of how well that he's played before coming to Jacksonville. So those are my thoughts on Brandon Scherff, and that concludes the offensive side of this. So let's hop into the defensive side of this with a pretty clear one in Folorunso Fatukasi. I think this is definitely a release for Jacksonville. You know, I like the guy himself. It hurts me to say that he's going to not be on this team, but when you look at the way he's playing on the field, he just doesn't have an impact. You know, it took me until, I think, week 17, week 18 to realize that he was healthy all year. And he's been out there playing. You just can't tell most of the time because he just hasn't been as good in Jacksonville. At best this year, he's graded out as average. He had one really good game, but it's average over the course of the year. And the way PFF works, when you play good over the course of a whole season, the more snaps you do, the higher up your grade goes. He played a lot of snaps compared to last year. His grade didn't go up because he's playing average. And you can see that with your own eyes. It's not just a PFF evaluation. I look at a number and decide this. When you're watching the Jaguars, you can tell that Fatukasi isn't having the impact you want him to have. You also talk about the fact that this team clearly needs to improve the interior, clearly needs to try to get in someone who is going to be potentially a good pass rusher, to have the threat coming from the interior as well. The only way you do that is have the spot open for that player, right? And we're not talking about Devon Hamilton, because even though he had a bad year, I think he's going to get better next year. And obviously, this is the first year of his extension. So you're not talking about moving on from him for at least 2 more years. So you hope he gets better. I think he will. But you need the air spot available to upgrade. So you're not keeping Fatukasi, especially because of the cap hit of like $8 million, I think, to keep him on the team. So it's just too much money. It's not a logical player to keep. There's not really anything to me that justifies it, especially when you're a player that's supposed to be good in run defense, and the way you grade out in run defense is below average. It's just not justifiable. I think this will be an easy decision for the Jaguars. They know they got to make changes. Fatukasi will probably be one of those changes. Now, let's talk about the linebackers. Talk about our best one, Foyesade Oluokun. I think he's definitely getting retained by Jacksonville. And what really tells me this, it's not just that he had his best year as a player, even if he struggled at the end of the season. But Nielsen, when he was at his press conference, emphasized tackling and aggression by the defense. And for me, like the most important part of this is tackling. Because this is the team that couldn't tackle. at the end of the season. That's why they didn't make the playoffs. They could not stop Derrick Henry. Even though he's nearly 30 years old, they can't tackle him. And so you look at players who would fix that, players who are bright spots already on the team. Oluokun is obviously in that camp, right? Because even though he didn't lead the league in tackles this year, I think he was like top 5 still. He was in the mix going into the final week of the season. Like, he's a very good tackler. And so you need those kinds of guys, and you also need the kinds of guys that are going to coach up your linebacking core of young players. I mean, you have, whether you like the picks or not, you've got 3 players that you've drafted over the last 2 years, and Devin Lloyd, Chad Muma, and now Ventrell Miller. You got to coach those players up. And obviously, like, Nielsen's going to have an emphasis on that. He wants to teach guys. He wants them to improve. And I'm very happy saying those things. Everything he said from his press conference was a home run to the people who are really looking closely at this and what this team needs. And Oluokun is one of those players who helps support that vision and helps the Jaguars to fix the problems that they have. And so, really, if there's anything I think happens to Oluokun that isn't the status quo, I think it's him getting an extension this offseason. Now, we'll see. They'll evaluate him, and I wouldn't be upset if he does get extended. You could save a bit of money doing that as well if you want to have more cap space available. So, Oluokun, if anything, the only thing that's changing is going to be the length of the contract. And that's a maybe, but he's not going anywhere. He's not getting traded. He's going to be in Jacksonville. Now, here's my last really interesting one here. Darious Williams. I don't know whether he's going to be in Jacksonville next season, but I can definitively tell you that he is not getting released by the Jaguars. He is not going to be a roster cut. There is no world where that happens, because some team out there, if you don't feel like he's the best fit for your team and he's going to be as good of a player, there are teams out there who would easily trade you a good draft pick for him. I look at the Lions. I look at the 49ers. You know, you look at the Lions specifically, they have a lot of needs in the secondary. This is a very good player who could come in and start for them. The 49ers, very zone-heavy team. This was the one spot where they kind of need that second guy across from Charvarius Ward. So Darious Williams, obvious example of that. They're going to go all in this offseason because they need to go back and they need to win the big game. So this is a move that makes tons of sense for both those teams, especially when you consider the $11 million per year deal that he is on, which I think got bumped up $1 million because of how well he performed this year. So there's going to be a market for him. The question is whether he's going to end up being the scheme fit they want or not. And so simply, he's going to get retained. It just comes down to how much man coverage this team plays. And do they think that Darious Williams can play at the same level in man coverage? You also have to consider the fact that you have 1 year left on this deal. It's not a scenario where you're keeping him another year and then you're trading him, because he's not going to be under contract. He's a free agent then. So I think you need to look at the future of your cornerback room and think, is this guy going to be here for a while? And especially, is he going to be here during a championship run, which they'll say yes to that because they think they're going to go battle for a championship this year because they kind of need to. I don't think they will. I think it's going to take at least until 2025 for this team to be good enough to go win a Super Bowl, and that is best case scenario. But I think they're going to look at him like a player they could still use. It just depends on how well does he fit the scheme and what Nielsen wants to do. So we'll see what happens there. But it's a very interesting one. I think either way, the result's going to be pretty good, because you're going to have a very good, affordable player on the team, or you're going to have a very high draft pick you're getting out of it. I think you'd get a third-round pick, at least. I don't think you're getting anything later than that, because this is a guy who played phenomenal this last year. He fits the needs for those teams. They are championship contenders trying to get to the next level. You do not let this player hit the open market. You go and make a move to try to get him through a trade. So you look at that, and then you consider maybe you get a comp pick after the end of next year if you're one of those teams too. So I think you could easily justify it with Darious Williams. Either way, I'm pretty torn on it. Personally, I think I'd probably consider trading him, just depending on the deal that you get. So let's go to the final guy now. Rayshawn Jenkins. I think this is a release. It feels pretty clear to me because it's a big cap hit. I think it's like 9-10 million that we're talking about this year that you can free up. It is over the course of 2 years that you free it up, but you can free up more if you decide to do like a post June 1st cut. Jenkins, well, he was a hero in 2022. The Jaguars are not going to pay players for what they did. They're going to pay them for what they're going to do. And I think they made a mistake last year saying that they were going to keep Rayshawn because of how well he played in 2022. And I'm kind of guessing that's why they did. I think it's probably a good guess. But Jenkins just wasn't the same player. Because those moments, to have the game-winning interception against the Cowboys or force the fumble in Week 18 to send the Jaguars to the playoffs and to beat Tennessee at home and get that first like true franchise victory over Tennessee in a big moment. Those aren't things that happen all the time, right? And so you've got to constantly evaluate that. And you look at this last year, he just didn't have those moments. And that was the whole thing justifying it being here. He's at best been an average player this year. I think he struggles in coverage, and I don't see him as really a logical option for Ryan Nielsen's defense. I think you want to go with like another guy there, whether it's Antonio Johnson, who's a clear candidate to take over if they see him best at safety, which they did say that. I want to make that clear. When they first talked about him at the pressers last year, they said they see him as a safety, not primarily as a slot cornerback. You look at what Rayshawn does, the snap counts that he took over the last couple of years are very similar to what Antonio Johnson was in college. So I think Antonio Johnson's a pretty clear candidate, but they could also say, let's go out and let's get a different player that we think has a ton of upside, and let's have Nielsen coach him up. But at this point with Jenkins, you kind of got what you got. It's too much money. You can't really justify it. You got a player who I think is better behind him, and he's like $1 million a year. Well, Jenkins is nearly $10 million. It's going to be a glaring opportunity to save money. And I don't think they can miss that. So I think Jenkins ends up being the final release for the team here. Now, final thing we're going to talk about, total cap space. Just want to give you guys a number on this. This is the smallest number you would have at this point because this is projecting the pre-June 1st cuts. So this is not pushing money down the road. This is taking all the dead cap this year. And so you are freeing up a substantial amount of money. Now, the players that we cut, I think they're going to cut Cam Robinson. I think Braden Scherff is another one. I think Fatukasi. You're talking about 3 players in the trenches. That's their focus. That's what they want to add to this team. They make a lot of sense. And then finally, we just talked about him. Rayshawn Jenkins has a clear successor on the team. Go make a move there. Start developing the young guy who's not going to cost you anything. And hopefully be a good starter. So those are their moves. And it gives us quite a bit of cap space to work with. So we're up to $46.6 million. This takes you currently from $11.3 million. Now, if we are doing post June 1st cuts, I'll give you a number here. I'm just calculating it as we talk. Cam Robinson apparently might not be an option. Let's see. Do that, and then Fatukasi. Your number would be $54 million. So there's a little bit more that you can save with this team. So definitely something they'll consider. Actually, scratch that $62.3 million. So nearly $20 million extra dollars that you could save depending on where you put the cap hits. Sorry for the bit of confusion there. But those are your numbers. I think those are the players they realistically move on. And one thing I do want to know, we'll talk about next video with receiver. I have heard things about them saying that receiver is a big need for this team, and they're very closely considering an upgrade at that position. I don't know if that happens through Zay Jones. The way I see it right now, I think it's going to be through Calvin Ridley, and I'll leave that conversation for the next episode. But the way things are being handled right now, and what they're probably going to have to use the franchise tag on, and the things we hear about Calvin Ridley, I don't think he'll be back here. And I think that's probably where they're going to make their move in the receiving corps. So that's why I got Zay Jones returning here, just for some justification. But that's all I've got for you guys. Next video that we do in this series is going to be about extensions, players that are not currently under contract. Also, could be a player or two that is currently under contract that you want to throw another year on. So we'll talk about those, we'll project them, and then we'll start getting into trades, free agency predictions. And while I'm doing all this, we'll have some updates on the big board, some prospect rankings, some fun stuff like that. So I'm really excited for that, guys. It's going to be fun. We're really close to the first moves being made of the offseason. This is around the time they start happening. Give it a week or two. We're going to start seeing things happen because they literally have to. There's no other option. So I appreciate y'all watching. I hope you have a great weekend here. Enjoy not having to watch football for a weekend, or maybe you do enjoy watching it, but I think the Jaguars are torture at times, so it's a nice break sometimes. But that, or maybe watching NASCAR. We'll see. But that's all I've got for you. Hope you have a great rest of your day. And finally, go Jags.